Day by a good showing of people power. And we have a number of speakers here today that know way more about the subject than I might. Our first speaker is going to be Dr. Robert Natelson. He's a U of M law professor and chairman of the Montanans for Better Government. And if Dr. Natelson will come on and talk to us.
The other day, my kids came home with a disease du jour, and it went a long way toward knocking out my voice. So I'm going to try to keep my voice down and let the microphone do the work for me. Can everyone hear me? You can. Does it help if I put it closer? Does that help? Okay, that's the way we'll do it. Those of us, practically all of us here, who are friends of free markets, low taxes, freedom generally, should have been vindicated, have been vindicated by the events around the world in the last 4 years. You all remember before communism was banished from Eastern Europe, we heard that people under socialism were as happy or almost as happy as those under capitalism. That some socialist economies, specifically that of East Germany, worked as well or almost as well as those in the West. And yet when the Iron Curtain parted and the wall came down, we found a society that was economically bankrupt, morally devastated, and environmentally devastated. You all remember that it was not all that long ago when it was viewed that in democratic countries that the inevitable trend of government policy was always to the left. That it was written like an iron rule of history, that there would always be more and more socialism in democratic governments. And then came along a grocer's daughter, who by a fluke of history became Prime Minister of England. And in just a very few years, Margaret Thatcher worked a small miracle, and a country that had been 60% socialist became at least 60% capitalist. And even while England is mired in a recession today, everyone admits that England is a lot better off than it would have been. Even Margaret Thatcher's enemies were converted. Even those people who used to further the socialist agenda in England have been changed. What Margaret Thatcher started in England has ignited all over the world, not just in the formerly socialist countries of Eastern Europe, but in the famous socialist paradise such as of Sweden, where they're busily now repealing their welfare state and lowering their tax burden. You've all heard that some countries in Latin America, notably Mexico, have had enormous success as a result of free market reforms and lowering the tax burden. Mexico is a well-known case, but how many people have heard about Chile? Just a decade ago, Chile was a country that was mired with a socialist economy and a military dictatorship. And somehow, light came into the minds of those people who were running the military dictatorship, and they came to the conclusion that the socialist economy doesn't work anymore. It never really worked. And so they invited in free market reformers like Milton Friedman to restructure for them, or develop a plan to restructure the Chilean economy. Eventually, the military dictators left, and Chile became a democracy. But Chile has kept the free market reforms. And today, Chile is the greatest success story in Latin America. The economy of Chile grew 9.7% in the last year alone. And that country is well on its way to becoming a first world nation rather than a third world nation. That is the kind of vindication we've seen worldwide. The same thing can be paralleled for states throughout the United States. A series of economic studies done in the late 1970s and 1980s have detailed, beyond peradventure of a doubt, the clear connection between high and rising tax burdens and economic stagnation, and between low and dropping tax burdens and economic success. State after state that has raised its taxes in response to budget crises or for other reasons has seen its economy decline as a result. State after state that has begun the process of lowering taxes and bringing government spending under control has seen its economy increase. The information about what declining taxes do for a state economy, and the information about what limiting government spending does for a state economy has been used in some states that were faced with budget crises. I could mention Wisconsin, for example, Massachusetts, Virginia, Florida, Michigan, states with both Republicans and Democratic governors who would face budget crises, some of them worse than the one we face in Montana, and have set about to cure those budget crises without raising taxes. Massachusetts, for example, 2 years ago was bankrupt. In those short 2 years, Massachusetts has balanced its budget, has cut government spending, has improved services, has privatized widely, and has lowered taxes 5 times. So this is the sort of knowledge, both worldwide and nationwide, that should be our vindication. And yet the message has not reached the people in Washington, and it has not reached the people in Helena. You all know what is transpiring in Washington. Let me say something about what is transpiring in Helena. We entered this legislative session with a deficit in the realm of $300 million. Perhaps that figure is somewhat inflated, but let it pass. $300 million. The response to that from our legislative and gubernatorial leadership has been almost exclusively on the tax side. They tell you that they're cutting government programs, they're cutting spending. Don't you believe it? What they're doing is they're reducing the rate of increase of government spending. Government spending in Montana is expected to increase in the next biennium by 9%. So much for government austerity. And it's not just that they're proposing tax increases to balance the deficit. It's much worse than that. They face a $12 million deficit in the highway fund. So Governor Roscoe comes out with a proposal to increase the gas tax by $70 million and settles for a proposal to increase it by $50 million. They face a $100 million cash flow deficit in the workers' comp fund. So legislative leadership proposes a $200 million increase in the payroll tax. They face a $100 million reverse structural deficit in the general fund. So they propose a $140 million net revenue positive sales tax. What is going on in Helena today is not deficit balancing, it's not cost cutting, it's raising taxes for the sake of raising taxes. It's raising taxes because they want to have, in the words of one Republican legislator, a cash cow that can fund their programs. One of the great findings of the scholarship of the last decade has been that the position that libertarians and conservatives held for many years, one position was mistaken. For many years we believed that taxes increase because government spending increases. Now we know that it's somewhat the other way around. That actually when they raise taxes, that causes government spending more than government spending actually increases taxes. It's on the tax side that we've got to rein this thing in. It's the taxes we've got to bring down, and the government spending will follow. The successes in those states that have reinvented government, that have made government more responsive, more entrepreneurial, more cost efficient, that have privatized and introduced market incentives and market-like incentives to government, those states only accomplished what they accomplished by keeping taxes down. Because the minute the politicians see more taxes on the table, all the plans for government reform disappear. That's the reality. One month ago, when you added up all the proposals of the Roscoe administration and its allies for increased taxes, they added up to a 30% tax increase for Montana. 30% in a single budgetary year. That translates out to $850 a year for every household in Montana, over and above what we now pay. That's what the legislative leadership and the governor's office, Republicans and Democrats alike, were planning to foist upon the people of Montana. What has happened since that time? I can't report that we're going to have no new taxes. We're you're going to have your taxes because I've already passed some. But what has happened since that time has been a tribute to citizen action. One after another, the more outrageous proposals have been trimmed back. The Roscoe's administration's 10-cent a gallon gas tax has been reduced down to 7 cents. Still far too high. We don't need any. But 7 is better than 10. The proposed payroll tax has been cut in half, and the sales tax has apparently been defeated. Let me tell you the story about the sales tax, because this is one of the most hopeful signs. You may have read in the Missoulian today there was something that purported to be an analysis of why the sales tax was defeated. Well, let me tell you what the Missoulian didn't tell you about why the sales tax was defeated. For day after day after day over the last month or so, citizens groups have been up in Helena, breaking Republican legislators away from their legislative leadership, telling them that if you vote for the sales tax, you're going to be defeated. And gradually, Republican legislators began to listen to that message. And then, on the day of the sales tax vote, just last Tuesday, I and the representatives of 3 other organizations went to the rotunda with petitions, no new taxes petitions, signed by tens of thousands of Montanans, nearly 40,000 signatures, far exceeding all the special interests that gather in the rotunda in any legislative session combined. And it was that day that the sales tax met its death. That's the power of citizen action. We have a saying in Montanans for Better Government: when the politicians fail, it's time for the people to lead. We have only won a small part of the battle in Helena, but the defeat of the sales tax and the reduction of some of these other tax hikes indicates that we can stop being on the defensive now, and we can start going on the offensive. We can restructure government to reduce government's appetite for tax dollars permanently. We can do that in a way that actually increases the efficiency, the responsiveness, and the quality of government services. When the politicians fail, it's time for the people to lead. We, the people of Montana, are in the position to lead. Let's do it. Let's do it now. Thank you very much.
Let's hear it for words of wisdom, shall we? Speaking of words of wisdom, we've got a few more for you. And I'd like to call on Mr. Mike Fellows, chairman of the Missoula County Libertarian Party, to share his thoughts with us.
Thank you. When this country was founded some 200 and some years ago, it was founded on 3 basic principles: life, liberty, and property. Well, now we have government intrusion in all those areas. In your life, government's taken over everything. They're in the telecommunications. They violate everything. As far as property, we don't own property anymore. Now we have taxes on property. If you don't pay your taxes, they come and confiscate your property and sell it in sheriff's auctions or whatever. That's not right. Individuals, we believe that the right of the individual is imminent. People should have the right to do what they please without interfering with other people's rights. Those are rights that are inalienable. But government has gotten too large since those days, and we need to trim back. Studies have found that if we cut government and cut taxes, the economy will increase. People will have better jobs, they'll make more money, we'll have more money to spend. We can get rid of the deficit by several ways. One proposal is to go ahead and print up some new money, pay off all the debt, and start from scratch. Since everybody owes us money, that wouldn't really work. Several other programs that will save us money: if we cut farm subsidies, we can save up to $25 billion a year. If we cut military spending for countries like Japan and West Germany, we can cut up to $185 billion a year. Those things have happened, and they will foreseeably happen because of the world markets. And with the current status of socialism and of communism in the world. Where libertarians believe we need less government fight for that. It might take a while, but I think it's possible. And if we can cut down taxes, we'd be better off in Montana's economy and the U.S. economy as a whole. Thank you. Now I guess we can just open it up for any interested parties that would like to come and say a few words about taxes in general and anything else that's on your mind. You're welcome to. Yes, there is a tea party on Saturday. We are collecting tea bags along with several other groups, including Montanans for Montanans and Big Montanans for a Better Government. Plan to collect these tea bags with your comments about how government can be reduced, how state government can be reduced. We will send these tea bags and comments and questions to Governor Roscoe and Helena and President Clinton in the U.S. Capitol in Washington. And that'll happen from 10 to 6 on Saturday down at Malfunction Junction. We encourage everybody to show up and drop your tea bags and tell the people in government that we just won't take bigger taxes and bigger government, that we need to have less taxes and less spending and privatize a lot of programs that no longer are needed. Programs have gotten too big over the last couple of decades, and that stuff can better be done on a private scale. As private citizens working within business can better control their costs and be more competitive than big bloated government bureaucracies like the Work Comp Fund and CETA programs of the 70s that never worked in the first place. Thank you. And thank you for coming this afternoon. If you'd like any information, stop by, we'll give you some.
I'd love to go up there, but I have severe microphobia.
I do too.
With us tonight are Bill Holloway with Montanans for Montanans and Jim Messina with Missoulans Against the Sales Tax. This is being sponsored by the Missoula County Libertarians. And of course, we believe that the individual's right supersedes anything else, and taxation is just another thing of forced initiative upon the American public by the government. We know that there are some taxes that need to be paid by the public, probably to sustain basic services in order to keep our streets safe and our borders safe from enemy aggression. But beyond that, you know, things that are better left in the private hands should be left there. And we adamantly oppose the sales tax on June 8th. I'm going to ask Bill here, what is the group Montanans for Montanans, and why were they organized?
They were organized specifically to fight the sales tax. And it's a relatively new organization, but we have accomplished a surprising amount. We even have, if you want to call it that, an agent clear over in Webo. We send him material and he spreads it around the town of Webo. We have that in several other cities over the state.
It seems like there's a lot of groups out there. How large is your group?
I really don't know. I really don't know. I've never seen them all at once.
I know it's government reform is being spread throughout and Missoula is no. It's the same here in Missoula, Jim. Why was Missoulans Against the Sales Tax formed?
Missoula Citizens Against Sales Tax was formed to be a chapter of the statewide MOST, Montanans, now it's COST, Citizens Opposed to a Sales Tax, which is a statewide organization made up of labor and community organizations. AFL-CIO, the Democratic Party, Montana People's Action, which is who I work for in the Bay, and other groups got together to form this. And I guess I'm here for kind of comic relief, since I'm a liberal Democrat who believes in the taxation system. But I'm here to tell you why that I think the sales tax is a very bad idea for Montana. I guess we'll get to that.
Yes, that's one thing that libertarians and other people can agree upon the sales tax, is that we have this one thing in common, that we don't want the sales tax, and we can argue after we defeat the sales tax, about how much tax we actually need to either reduce government or reform it or things that we logically need. Now, Bill, and I notice here that you've done some research on some of these things.
Oh, yes.
And some of these, let's see, Montana newspapers. You've done some things here, and obviously there's going to be some rallies tomorrow, and
Yes, I have a copy of that.
at
Least I
to try to
should.
expose some of the newspapers' stand for the sales tax, because they've, as earlier stated in both the Tribune and the Missoulian, that
Well,
one of the
there's
Public Service Commissioners, Driscoll, had said that there was a supposed private meeting, May 6th, where they made a deal, and obviously by these figures it might seem to be true.
It might seem to be. It's interesting here that the Missoulian will get approximately 41% tax cut if the sales tax goes through. But another one, the Montana Standard over in Butte, is in revolt against the other Free Enterprise newspapers, and in effect said they didn't care for this 34% tax cut. They were still against a sales tax, and they have come out continuously against the sales tax. And as punishment, a bill came through the legislature, which didn't pass, that would have removed the Montana Standard's tax cut under the sales tax bill if the sales tax passed. Now, of course, this would have been more than a little bit illegal, so the bill never left the legislature, glad to say. If you're no sense of looking just at the newspapers, the Great Falls Tribune, of course, would collect about $44,000. Stone Container would collect some $2,800,000, and Champion $337,000. These figures can be a few $100s either way. Exxon, Asarco, Kalispell Daily, and of course then there's the big one, Burlington Northern. They will run things through a series of discussions with lawyers, but they will end up with between $5 and $6 million in tax deduction if the sales tax goes through.
Yes, I think even during the last governor's race, where a former representative out of Great Falls, Paul Pistoria, had excited the views that that's one of the reasons why Burlington Northern had supported Dorothy Bradley's campaign based on the sales tax, because they would get a huge tax cut
That's right.
in form of property tax relief and other things. And I noticed there's going to be a rally that's going to be held tomorrow at the Missoulian building.
Yes, tomorrow, Friday, May 28th, there's going to be a rally at noon at the Missoulian to tell the Missoulian that the people vote no. We expect a lot of people to be there. This morning, bright and early, we got a call from the Missoulian telling us that we were wrong, that the sales tax was a good thing, but they'd welcome us. So it should be fun tomorrow at noon, and everyone who can come, we've got a lot of signs for you to hold up, and let's send the Missoulian a message. It'd be fun.
And I have noticed in the form of different editorials via the Great Falls Tribune and the Missoulian that there seems to be a lot of editorials against the sales tax and not too many for it. So I'd imagine that come June 8th, they're going to really have some trouble.
I think so. Governor Roscoe has a huge TV campaign going, and yet polling that labor unions have done has shown the gap even widening bigger. As people look at this, either they're conservatives, liberals, or moderates, it's just not a good idea for Montana. You just can't give a good reason why we should have a sales tax, except for we need to create more stimulus for business. And I think in the 1980s we tried what we call trickle-down economics. We cut taxes for the rich, we cut them for business, and all we got was screwed. So we're not going to do it in Montana.
Yeah, I've noticed something else, excuse me, about the sales tax when it first was passed and started coming out, that people actually were talking about a 6% flat income tax along with that. And it seems like now it's just sales tax, and I think under the 6% tax, most Montanans would probably pay more income tax.
Than they currently do, yes, but it would be less than they would pay with a sales tax.
And I see the proponents now have television ads out where they claim that 3/4 will be paid by tourists and 1/3 by business, I believe, somewhere in there. How do you feel about that?
First of all, the very first thing they said that the tourists would spend $900 million here. Then they came up with a figure of course, 36 million that would be collected from the tourists. Well, the error in that is that many of the things that the tourists buy, particularly the ones with travel trailers, the self-contained travel trailers, and the motorhomes, and of course the big campers, they buy food. They don't eat in restaurants. Food would not come under the sales tax, just regular food. So, first of all, that $36 million figure is an error because they considered that they buy everything and pay sales tax on everything. They don't. Then the next thing is the sales tax is supposed to bring in $259 million. Now, tell me how 36 million suddenly becomes half of 259 million. Mathematically, this doesn't add up. What they have done is they mentally took all of the money that the tourists would leave in Montana, the inflated version, and they pretended they could pull it out separately, and then they put it into the final approximately 60 million that'll be left to operate the state after all the other deductions and so forth are taken out. Now, if you take that and put it against that small 60 million, oh, it looks huge. But as a practical matter, that's impossible. You cannot do that. And for them to put an ad on TV of that type smacks of legal chicanery.
Well, the Department of Revenue, controlled by Governor Roscoe's appointee, has issued figures that are nowhere even close to that. They say that at most 7% of the revenues will come from tourism. And the only way you could possibly get what Mark is adding up is that you apply it specifically to the new taxes, and that's not how any revenue's ever been collected. I mean, there's even newspapers who support the sales tax have come out saying that this is a little weird and it's a new tax, and we just call it a lie.
I'd like to remind people out there that if you are watching and want to call in, our number is 542-6228. That's 542-MCAT. We're live. We'd like to have your calls. For or against the sales tax, call us up and tell us how you think. We'd be glad to hear from you. We've got some other figures here that Bill has provided with respect to other states and the sales tax. And it's kind of...
Here's an easier one to read.
It's interesting that maybe Bill could be better state that for us, because I know
this is a very small section of a very large graph. If I had it all here, it would stretch from here to that wall. But I simply took the years 82 through 86. Can you fellas pick that up at all?
it's probably kind of small.
I think it's too small.
It would be.
Can you pick it up at all? Now you see the yellow, all that line of yellow dots? We had a recession in 1983, and those are the states that raised the sales tax. And every time we have a recession, we have a bunch of states raise the sales tax. And I could take the whole chart clear back to the 30s, and you'd see the same effect. Now the parts that you couldn't see is that the figures on this are for a family of 4 on $20,000 a year. That's not very wealthy. And it shows such things as Georgia, for instance. It went along for years with a 3% tax, taking $222 a year from this family. All at once in 1986, it jumped to $318. How did they do it? They discovered utilities and food and put a sales tax on it. there's a buzz back here.
Yeah, look at the
As near as I can figure,
screen here.
Roscoe's model for a sales tax, so far, the closest is closer to Hawaii than any other state. Hawaii is known by the taxpayers union as a tax hell. Now there's things on here you can't see, like little plus signs above many of these numbers. The plus sign means that that state also has a city and a county sales tax. In some cases, this has been allowed to run riot. In Oklahoma, for instance, there are 741 separate sales tax entities. If you go in a store anywhere in Oklahoma and buy a refrigerator, if you don't live in that town, the storekeeper has to find out where you live, which county, which city, is it in a certain irrigation district, is it in a transportation district, and ask you a million questions, then figure the sales tax for where that refrigerator is going to be used. That you can imagine it's an accounting headache. Of the cities, or of the states that have a sales tax, only 2 did not lie to the taxpayers as far as the state rate is concerned. They are Georgia and North Carolina. Those 2 states started at 3%. They are still at 3%. Those are the only 2, which means if you include the District of Columbia, based on past experience, you've got a 95% plus chance of your state sales tax rate going up. There's an interesting thing, though. Even though Georgia has a 3% rate, the amount that they take from the person making this $20,000 a year goes up because they Mickey Mouse around with the exemptions. The same thing happens in North Carolina. They change the exemptions around so that in the long run, they take more money from you, which means based on past experience of the 45 states and the District of Columbia, we have a 100% chance of the sales tax going up and taking more from the poor man's pocket. Okay?
I see. Washington State, they're kind of different from us because now they've got the sales tax, but now they're trying to put in place an income tax, and a lot of people are fighting.
In place or in addition?
In addition to a sales tax.
Yes.
They had a sales tax for years and no income tax, and so now the legislators and the government, they want more money, so now they've got this, they're trying to get an income tax in place, which has the people of Washington State.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if we do get a 4% sales tax, I'm sure that over time it will tend to grow.
Yeah, the first thing that all the other states have done is take out things like the low-income exemptions. They take out the exemptions that are given to low-income people or to special groups. And that kind of thing will be the first to go. Having worked in the legislature as an aide to the majority leader, I can tell you that when they need money, they go into things. They rob special accounts, and we'll get rid of all the protections as soon as this thing goes in.
Okay, we've got a call. Let's go ahead and... Hello, you're on the air. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, can you tell me, has anybody said what this sales tax would do to the Canadian trade coming across and how that might affect it?
Good question. Anybody have an answer?
Yeah, well, I can tell you I've working with some of the border towns on the Canadian border, and they are uniformly opposed to it. They think it'll absolutely gut their tourism economy. That's most of the jobs in places like Cutbank and places like that. And you can look at the figures and they don't lie. Those people just aren't going to come to Montana if we pass this sales tax.
So places like Sweetgrass and Eureka and some other border-type towns would be obviously hurt by sales tax.
I had a very unusual experience in that regard. I was in, of all places, an Air Force clothing store. That's not a PX or a commissary or anything like that. This is a clothing store where the members of the armed forces go to buy uniform parts and so forth. And there were 4 Canadians in there. And it seems that certain parts of the Canadian uniforms are the same as ours. And they bought, amongst other things, those real thick-soled winter MP boots for the poor MP that's out there on the guard gate and it's cold. They bought camouflage uniforms, heavy underwear. They put in orders for winter parkas. These men were all officers, and they have to buy their own uniforms. They came down here because the taxes and so forth on them were so high in Canada. But the funny part of it was they came all the way down here and they bought the uniforms, and one of them said, well, the only thing, they wouldn't make anything on it because they turned their wives loose in Great Falls and they were shopping.
Yeah.
But if we lost that trade, it would really hurt.
Yeah, I travel quite a bit around the state, and I know Great Falls, I think Havre probably has quite a bit of Canadian trade. You know, and I mean, those towns are full, you know, and I'd hate to see that. I'd hate to see them lose that just because we, you know, added a sales tax. I wanted to ask one other thing. Do you support the petition drive to repeal the other income tax issue that's on the books now?
I personally do not. I can't speak for my organization, but I think it's a really bad idea. If you don't like that and you put them back in a special session, I think what you're going to get is a lot worse thing. I think it's a lot more fair than the sales tax. They've tried to make it better. They had to come up with the money to balance the budget, and I think it's a more fair proposal.
I don't know, from what I've heard at this past legislature, it seems like that the legislature itself saw us dealing with old problems, so eventually they have to go back into a special session to fix the things that should have been fixed a long time ago.
Well, that's how we got the sales tax. We went into special session.
And as a libertarian and a libertarian philosophy, I would say that no, we don't need really an increase. We've got to find ways to cut some of the things out of government that are non-essential. And some of those things like the Board of Regents, I see is pretty much non-essential, because if the presidents themselves make decisions for the university system, then it seems like we're pouring money into a Board of Regents. That if we could eliminate those, it wouldn't make a lot of difference. And I guess there was, before the 72 Constitution here in Montana, they had a Board of Presidents that met. And those kinds of...
Has anybody tracked the growth of state government over the last few years to see just how much it's growing?
It's one of the slowest growth rates of any state in the country.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That's the last 2 years.
The last 10 years, according to Citizens for Tax
Last 10
Justice.
years.
Yeah.
I
mean, it is growing. I mean, you can't say that it's not growing, but it's growing at a slower rate than the national level.
No.
Which doesn't make it right, but, you know.
Now,
Well, thanks very much.
Thank you. And if you do want to call in, our number here at Missoula Community Access Television is 542-6228, and we're discussing the sales tax and some of the effects of the sales tax. I noticed in the Tribune today they've kind of compiled a list of things that most people buy here in Montana, and they figured it's going to cost people anywhere from $400 to $600 a year just based on those kinds of things that they buy on a sales tax. And that's probably on average twice or maybe up there with the income tax people do pay.
Yeah, and I think it's...
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think it's it's important to look at what we get. That's been my rap when I've been speaking around the city. And it's true, I've had a lot of families come up to me and say, we need property tax reduction. And I think there's some validity in that. The problem is that the Department of Revenue has determined that 65% of the revenue that will go to property tax reduction will go to businesses. Businesses will get 65% of it. And the sales tax will get rid of I-105, which places a cap on things. And so the local counties like Missoula, who now has to pay for their own welfare because the state gave it back to them, they're going to have nothing they can do except for to up your property taxes. So within a year or two, I'm sure we can all agree, those property taxes will be right back up where they used to be, in fact, higher.
A minute ago, you were talking about you're for the income tax. And Mr. Ludwig from the Missoulian, did an extensive study on that. And he found that the states that depended most heavily on income tax were more prosperous than the ones who depended on sales tax. And he worked long and hard at his computer to come up with those figures. And I kind of go along with him. Traveling around the country, it seems that the states, when I think about it, the states that had the heaviest sales tax seem to be less affluent on the average. But there's one thing that I wanted to bring up besides that. The governor of Massachusetts, the new governor of Massachusetts, took over, and the place was chaotic. Their bonds were rock bottom, and he put the brakes on and said, there'll be no new spending. And he started to cut. He cut taxes 5 different times. The state is now solvent. Their bonds are good. But he found that the bureaucracy would not make any attempt to save unless they were 100% sure there was no new money. When it finally got through to them, there would be no new money. Then they learned to cut costs. The same thing happened in Virginia, and it's happening in Wisconsin now. Our governor, however, has not seen fit to call upon those fellows for information and so forth to see how they did it.
I think, too, it's just your basic department budgets that they've got to get rid of the whole budget before they can get new funding next year, and that could be part of the problem, that if we can find a way for them to keep the money that they have in their budget now to use next year, plus get new funding, they wouldn't necessarily have to use the rest of their budget for the next current fiscal year just to wipe the balance zero and just wasting that money on who knows what that they have.
Another thing that I think we have in every session, we have some new legislators. And it takes a while to learn the job. Well, they don't have a chance. They're elected and immediately, here they are. They're supposed to do it. We should have the election a greater distance from the time the legislature meets so that the man can study the job, or the woman can study the job, and not be literally a lamb led to slaughter out there because they have no training. Another thing is, this is kind of funny, I think lawyers are partly to blame. I have here what should be a very simple statement as done by an attorney with a PhD and a degree in state government. He says, the fiscal distress felt by the majority of states in the early 90s is the result of many factors. The national recession is the most important of these, and the problems associated with it will be temporary. Other factors, however, have contributed to a structural deficit. In many states, it is an expenditure path that cannot be sustained by current revenue systems. This longer-term problem will not go away once the recession ends. For the next several years, states will struggle to realign their spending and taxing programs into more evenly balanced systems. All of that, and all he's really saying is, you can't spend more money than you have coming in. That's the problem. They put up the bills in this type of language, and if you have no experience in it, you don't know what they're talking about. And I think we should have some rules or something in the legislature to have this, all the bills, in everyday language.
Now, that might.
I'd like to point out, though, the problem with that, I mean, and you're right, is that now with the new term limits we just passed without much debate, people are now going to have 3 sessions, and you're not going to have any of the leaders who've done this for a while and can explain to the freshmen. You're just going to drop them on there. So you got 90 days to solve the budget crisis. See ya. And I don't think that's realistic. I mean, term limits was a really bad idea.
No, they should have a long time before the session to study on it. And there should be some books published, and the newly elected person
Well,
should
they get the
receive the
freshman manual.
standard operating procedure.
Well, they get that. I mean, I helped write it last time.
But if you get it today and you have to be in the legislature tomorrow, it's a little late.
Well, the problem is they've talked about putting a bigger space in between, but the problem is you have a 90-day session, and laws take effect July 1st. Well, if you start the session in the middle of April, they won't have time to write the new laws to get them codified by July 1st. So they have to start the first week in January.
That's all right. We should have the election earlier.
Yeah.
The election earlier.
But the election by mandate has to be the first Tuesday in November.
And I know we can change that. We can change that. And have the election for our state offices 6 months earlier. Nothing is in stone, you know. I mean, we can change it.
Yes, I've noticed that we've got our little voter registration pamphlet that Mike Cooney from the state has sent us. And obviously I'm curious to get a feeling about how many people do you think will actually go through this and read some of the fine print?
Pretty weighty document.
It's written like this.
Because obviously the front page is nice and simplified, of course. Against referendum 111, Montanans believe taxes should be based on a person's ability to pay, and that corporations should shoulder their fair share of taxes to pay for the privilege of using the state's resources to make a profit. And they state in the last 13 years, the legislature has turned our tax policy upside down, with low and middle taxpayers subsidizing huge breaks on corporations. And that seems like what the sales tax would probably do.
Right.
But as you look through, there's a lot of annotated codes in here, and I would hope that everybody would sit down and try to figure this out. And if the average citizen didn't know what they're talking about, to contact your legislator, contact the person in your district, and have them sit down in a meeting and discuss some of these things, and make sure that you understand all the points of this plan so you can make an informed decision when June 8th comes around.
That's, I think, one of the problems is that you have a huge plan like this, and you have Governor Roscoe on TV for 30 seconds telling you his version of it. I think it's incumbent upon the citizens to do a little bit more studying than that.
And we've already stated that other states that do have a sales tax, eventually it rises.
Mm-hmm. Now, people say it always rises. Well, it doesn't always rise continually. There have been instances where the sales tax went down, but it never stayed down. The first time there was a little recession, it went back up again. So the all-over curve is up. New Jersey recently cut the sales tax way back, and people streamed across the bridge from New York. Now, New York is trying to find a way to take New Jersey to court for unfair interstate business practices. So it shows a difference the little sales tax can make. Just drop the sales tax and business goes up.
I notice they're only proposing a couple plans out there with sales tax and income tax increases. Has there been any other plans discussed around the state as far as raising new revenue?
Oh, sure, there's, a million and one plans. Some things like the value-added tax, which many people call a hidden sales tax. There's bigger corporation taxes, capping federal deductibility, so you can tax the higher income people, which both Mike McGrath and Frank Morrison, who ran for governor, talked about. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. The reason why you're about to vote on the sales tax is because sales tax makes business the most money. And if you look at the paper in the last week, they publish every other day who's giving to each committee. And if you read it, it's a who's who of big business who's giving to the pro-sales tax. I mean, you have $10,000 coming from Boise to help lower our property taxes so they can come build here. You have business from all over Montana, big business. You don't see many citizens. The average contribution is, what, $400? And, and I know in our group, the average contribution is like 26. So it's definitely, you're fighting the Goliath versus the small guys.
Well, Roscoe's group, Crack, has stated they're going to spend about $350,000 on airtime. What kind of, or how many votes do you think will that kind of money buy him?
Well, he's got to hope it can buy him 41%, because that's how many points he was down in the last poll.
And you don't really see that poll changing too much then.
Not right now, but as we all know, unopposed TV is one of the most deadly things. I mean, our group just did a literature drop last weekend in Missoula, but other places are not doing that. And so we don't know. I mean, there's a literature drop scheduled from our group the last weekend of the campaign and a bunch of radio, but Governor Ruska's going to do all that too. So we'll have to see how much it helps him.
And what kinds of things do Montanans for Montana have coming up here?
Well, we've been on the literature for quite some time, and we have this sort of thing spread all over the state. But we are thinking of going into TV the last week. And like you say, it's hard to get money. We're being outspent, all of us together are being outspent by Roscoe by 7 to 1. And with the money does come in, and it's $5, $10, $100 now and then. But it is coming in. And if anyone wants to send any to, well, I'm not supposed to say that. No, I'm not supposed to solicit funds.
Well, they know they've seen your name in the paper and stuff, so they can
Yes.
send it. But I noticed that some of the groups that gave money to Roscoe, like the Teachers Association.
Yeah, one of the teachers associations.
One of them.
Yes.
$10,000. I imagine if a sales tax were put in place, how much money do you think would that actually raise for education? And we're already too laden, I think, with administrators and other things, and the actual teachers themselves, as far as teaching, that's where the money should be used for.
Right. You know, well, they're taking a big risk. I mean, because there's no new money earmarked for education in this bill. So I mean, and it's funny, on the same day the teachers gave them $10,000, the bankers gave them $10,000. I mean, so they're getting money from big business.
That's unusual. There's something unusual about that. It seems that the top of the teachers union and the top of the bankers association, that big banks, are for sales tax, but the small bankers are not. I know some small bankers, a couple of which have my no sales tax stickers on the back windows of their automobiles. Another banker, every time I go his way, I take him material, which he reproduces and whatnot. And when I need to fax something, I can drop in and he faxes things for me for free. The same way with teachers. I was at an automobile swap meet in Hamilton a couple weeks ago, and I met several teachers down there. And the funny thing, they were all against the sales tax. They said, don't believe what you read. We had a terrible fight in our meetings, and their particular unit was against the sales tax, but it didn't outvote the top. But the teachers are not solid by any means.
Well, there are those who claim that Eric Fever and the Montana Teachers Federation, I guess it is.
MEA.
MEA.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That all he's trying to do is just buy more political clout in the next legislative session.
Yeah, I mean,
based on that.
The second biggest teachers union, the Montana Federation of Teachers, is wholly and strongly in funding the anti-sales tax movement. They understand the big picture, and they don't seem to want any more clout. They just want to beat it. So I think your point that teachers are split on this issue is very true.
As far as, I guess, administering the taxes, we're getting down there, but it's going to take them probably 141 or 161 employees plus equipment and various collectors around the area. That's going to be a big chunk out of the tax itself.
Yeah, $15 million is the Department of Revenue estimates. 140 new state employees.
So I imagine they'll have a new building and stuff to house these employees. Because I've noticed just trying to get to the maze of the WordCom system and how they're having trouble with their funds and stuff. You go to a nice big building where there's all kinds of employees that you wonder what they do, what their job is, and it's very difficult.
Yeah, it really is.
And they were surprised to see me last time I showed up, and I had to submit some papers for a nonprofit organization. They were just, my gosh, we've got a live person here. Let's sign him up. We need this fella. And I just thought, well, you guys must not do that much business.
Right.
You know, but if we can try to cut some of that, well, I guess there's a difference between waste and efficiency, I guess. But
Yeah.
and to me, just by going to the work comp, it seemed like there were some people that didn't have to be there because they were just there basically. And we're surprised that anybody showed up at their third floor office to sign forms. So
go ahead.
go ahead. Any last thoughts?
Well, when you mentioned about some of these things that we have to consider about downsizing and so forth a while back, okay. In public school employees per capita, we are the top in the whole United States. Number one. And frankly, I don't think we need to add any more to that. And in public school non-instructional employees per capita, we're in third place. There's some mighty rich states out there, and we're right up with them. Our top nominal income tax rate, we're in first place. That seems a little high for Montana. And so it goes. The total government employees per capita, we're fourth in the nation. Government administrative and financial employees per capita, we're fourth in the nation. The percent of personal income spent by government, includes federal aid, we're in 10th place. So we in one place, we're at least not the top when it comes to spending money. And in state university employees per capita, we're about the middle, a good place to be, 24th.
See, and that comes from Montana's for a Better Government, I believe.
Yes. And on some things, I think we could do very well if we pulled everything down to where we were about the middle.
Except for our teacher salaries where we're at the bottom.
Now, on that, there's like salaries everywhere. Montana's changing, I realize. But I turned down some very good jobs to stay in Montana because I can live cheaper in Montana. I can live a lot. I can buy a house in Montana for, I could until a few months ago, for $50,000 that would cost nearly $200,000 in California. So even though our wages are a little low, we shouldn't look at other states for comparison. We should look at where we stand for expenses. If our cost of living here is lower, then we can have just as good a standard of living with less money compared to California or New York or one of those states.
I think that's what our main function is to get the state going. I think it's got to be. We've got to try to at least put more money into our university system, try to get rid of the duplication so that we can get the state economy up as a whole. And instead of giving the trickle-down economic effect of businesses, we need to actually give more to the low and middle income folks so they can spend this up to where we need to be.
Right. I guess my last thing is just we hope you can all come to the rally tomorrow at noon at the Missoulian. Thanks. It would be great.
Okay, this has been a fun-filled hour of discussion on the sales tax. We have one other program that's going to be aired June the 1st. That's Tuesday from 7 to 8, and we'll have Vicky Cacciarella, Mike Cadis, Mike Halligan, Pam Egan, who's the Executive Director of Montana Family Union, and the moderator for that program is Mr. Bill Knowles. He's the radio and television professor at the University of Montana. And I would hope is that everybody takes a look at their booklet here and look it over. If you have questions, talk to your legislators. Make a good choice. As a libertarian, I'd say, vote no on all taxes. But look at it for yourself and make a good decision for yourself. And thanks for being with us tonight.
call referendum 111, and we vote on it next Tuesday in Montana. The question on the ballot will read like this: an act referred by the legislature for imposing a 4% sales tax as part of a comprehensive tax reform plan, or against imposing a 4% sales tax as part of a comprehensive tax reform. Hi everybody, I'm Bill Knowles from the faculty of the University of Montana School of Journalism. This is a live discussion of Referendum 111. And we have 4 guests with us tonight to do just that. 3 of them are lawmakers who voted one way or the other to put the issue before the voters next week. First, on my far left over there, Representative Mike Katus, Democrat, who represents the 55th District of Montana. That's north of the river, I believe. On my near left, a colleague from the university, Representative Vicki Cacciarella, who represents the 59th District. That's Farviews, and I think part of South Hills. I know it's Farviews because you represent me in the legislature. Good to have you, Vicki. When Vicki's not making laws, she's working in the registrar's office at the university. On my far right, our lone non-legislator on the panel, Pam Egan from Helena, Executive Director of the Montana Family Union. And on my near right, State Senator Mike Halligan, Democrat of Missoula, who ran unsuccessfully for Lieutenant Governor on the ticket with Dorothy Bradley last fall. Before we plunge headlong into a discussion of the sales tax, let's back up a few weeks to the end of the legislative session. As you recall, both major party candidates endorsed a sales tax during their campaigns, and so many of us, maybe not naive political optimists, thought the legislature might get the message and put a sales tax on the ballot early, or maybe pass it on their own, like the legislatures in 44 of the 45 sales tax states have done. But it was business as usual, as we saw in Helena. The sales tax was on again and off again. Both parties wrangled. Referendum 111 emerged during that last hectic week of the session, and here we are. And I'd like to ask each of our legislators if they're pleased with the performance of the legislature this year on this issue. And we'll start with Mike Katus, longtime opponent of the sales tax and treasurer of Montana Coalition Against the Sales Tax. Mike?
Bill, I am pleased that the sales tax is on the ballot. I did vote to put it on the ballot even though I oppose it, and I did that because for the last 8 years the sales tax has created a roadblock for doing anything else regarding fiscal or tax policy. And what we need to do is get the issue settled. The issue of the sales tax has become bigger than the legislature in more ways than one. It's an issue that only the people can settle, and the people need to settle it. Hopefully they'll defeat it big time, and we can go on with life for the next 15 or 20 years until it crops up again. But for the time being, we need to have the people settle the issue and settle it firmly, I hope, to the negative.
And Vicki Cacciarella?
I felt that this legislative session was very productive in the sense that the legislators in the House and the Senate worked together to come up with a tax reform package, which was our income tax proposal, which is out there now being challenged. I think that the wrangling and things that went on with the sales tax were really difficult. I voted also to put that issue on the ballot. It's time that the people have a say, that the legislators have a chance to listen to what the people want and feel out there. I come from a district where it's about 50-50, and it's a very difficult decision for me in representing those people in my district. But as far as the legislature was concerned this last time, in spite of the bad press perpetuated by that totally anti-tax group, this legislative session we did do hard work and came up with good compromises. And the reform package that's out there in the shape that it's in for the income tax proposal was good work on the part of the legislature. Not perfect, but good work.
And on the Senate side, Mike Halligan.
You know, I obviously spent a lot of time last year running with Dorothy on the sales tax, and the one that did pass in the session was fundamentally different than I think the one that we had talked about in that campaign. I ended up voting for it to allow it to go to a vote of the people. Because Governor Roscoe won the election, it was his philosophy that I think needed to prevail with respect to what the substance of the sales tax would look like. So as chairman of tax, we tried our best, and I guess I disagree somewhat that it was business as usual. I think if you look at the way that we handled the subject of the sales tax in the legislature, even though the governor talked in that last special session of getting it into a special session, it was a month before it was ever introduced in January, and then we dealt with it, I think, pretty responsibly from there. But it's fundamentally different than what we talked about, but we were productive, as I think Representative Cocciarella indicates, from subdivision reform to school finance to workers' compensation. It was a productive session, I think, across the board, even with the tax reform package that came out.
Okay. Pam Egan, first explain what the Montana Family Union is, and then tell us what your organization thought of the legislature's performance.
The Montana Family Union is the associate membership program of the AFL-CIO. What we do is provide an opportunity for those workers in Montana who don't have access to a union in their workplace to participate in organized labor and to further the issues that are of concern to working families through that participation. With regard to the legislature's performance on the sales tax issue, I think we have some mixed feelings as well. I mean, clearly, we've got a lot of folks up there who do real good work. Having been up there and watched that, I don't think you can deny that these are people who have the interests of Montana at heart and put that into their work when they were up there, particularly with regard to the sales tax issue. Again, as Representative Kada said, it's sort of it's a difficult decision to make whether or not to vote to put that on the ballot. I certainly don't think it was an irresponsible decision to vote to put it on the ballot, because clearly we had two gubernatorial candidates who ran on a sales tax platform, and I do believe that it is the case that the tax debate in Montana has been seriously stifled by this issue. So what we're hoping at this point is that we get it out of the way once and for all. And again, we're a group who's always, since our inception, strongly opposed to sales tax in any form. So.
Okay, you'll get a chance to say more about that a little later. Well, no matter what we think about what the legislature did, it has referred to all of us in the electorate whether to enact the tax. And if you have a question of our panel, we invite your participation. That's what the phone is doing, sitting on this table in front of me. The number is 542-MCAT, or that's 542-6228 if you don't like cutesy phone words. 542-MCAT or 542-6228. You see the number on your screen. While we're waiting for your calls, let's go around the panel and hear your reasons for supporting or opposing the tax, and we'll go back to you, Pam, to start.
Okay. The AFL-CIO and the Montana Family Union had an independent analysis of this tax bill done by Citizens for Tax Justice, and an analysis of the alternative proposal done by Citizens for Tax Justice. While taxes will go up under both bills, which they need to because we have a deficit that we need to deal with, and we have state government services that need to be funded, they will go up the most under the Roscoe sales tax plan. They will also go up the most unfairly. In fact, all but the very highest income levels will see their tax burden increase under this. What that says to us is that this is a case of burden shifting in which taxes again are placed unfairly on the middle class of Montana. We can't have that. What's happened in the past and what's happening today is when you increase the tax burden on middle class families unfairly, you pit middle class working person against the working poor. You start to de-assume welfare. You start to cut services that are necessary. That's our fundamental reason for opposing this tax.
Senator Halligan, you were for it during the campaign. You still for it?
I want to get the phone, but
I'll let them tell me when to pick it up. Go ahead, Nancy.
I'm in a real tough position on that because we did campaign for a year, and I did vote for the legislation, but I didn't get a chance to vote against it because to be a statesman or statesperson, we needed to put this thing on the ballot and, as Mike indicates, address it so we can get on to perhaps other things. And so, I am not going to, at least my mind is made up on this one. I'm not going to vote for this one because, I think initially our approach would have been to reform the spending side. The investment in human services and education would have been a dramatic and important part of that. That is not a component of this bill at all. I think the mix of tax relief would have gone to homeowners and individuals rather than more on the business side, because obviously the shift that Pam is talking about would have taken place. I think we would have been a lot more sensitive to that. And I think we'd have taken time to develop the package, not only before the session, but the vote in November instead of June, so that we would have been able to, hear what people are saying about the mix. And then lastly, I guess my own personal reason, the value-added tax that I and Representative Ream proposed, the tax experts across the nation are looking at the value-added tax, and most states with sales tax are looking at that tax because it is far, far more efficient to administer, and it's gone to the United States Supreme Court. They've said it's the fairest, most efficient tax they've ever seen, and that a state now should not be looking at the sales tax alternative until this issue gets fully discussed and debated, and then you can see whether it's appropriate. So I think timing, spending-wise, we're just doing this wrong.
Quickly, what's the difference between a sales tax and a value-added tax?
Well, the sales tax is just simply tacked on at the end of the sale. In our case, you could look at the European model of a value-added tax, and that's simply a transaction tax, and it pyramids all the way through. This would not be based on that transaction approach. It would be based on the value added to a particular a log going through the process, or the attorney services, less the costs of doing business, and then there's a formula that you follow. And it's one of the broadest taxes that exists, so that all of us pay part of it. It eliminates taxes such as the business equipment tax and the corporate license tax, which are very complex and costly to administer. And I mean, it's a simple tax in that sense that once I deduct my cost of doing business from the value that I've had, that's the tax I pay, and the deductions are minimal, and they're in a formula for small businesses and medium and large businesses, and we would have to adapt it to fit Montana. But it's something that the tax experts say is the wave of the future, and we would be fools not to look at it before we adopt a major change in our tax policy.
Okay, Vicki Cottrella, as you said, 50-50 in our district. What do you do with that?
I think that the purpose in voting for a sales tax, if you came from our district, was to fund education and to look at the services that we provide to people in our community that are less fortunate. What I see happening and in the design of this sales tax is that we are setting ourselves up to repeat the past. And history tells us that we are in the situation we're in right now because we've given big tax breaks to people, corporations that have promised us jobs which haven't come through. And that history is sitting there in that tax bill waiting to happen again. I see that it's designed to provide future benefits to large corporations, out-of-state corporations who virtually raped and left this state, leaving us without jobs and leaving our people behind. I don't see that this bill is designed to provide future benefit to higher education or K-12 education at all. I think that the Bradley-Halligan bill was a much better proposal in that respect. There was some future there. As Mike had said earlier, there were plans in place to ask people how they wanted to spend this money. This to me is a giveaway and a give back that we've lived through since about 1981 that put us in the deficit situation we're in now. I don't see this bill fixing that problem. I just see it perpetuating the past.
Okay, I want to get back to that education issue in a minute, but first I want to go to Mike. And I know you've actively opposed it for a long time. Tell us why.
I think when figuring out what you think about taxes, particularly major portions of the tax structure in Montana, you need to have some kind of a philosophy with regard to that. I believe that people who have the ability to pay ought to be those who carry the greatest burden. Said another way, I think that people who benefit the most from our society ought to be willing to contribute the most to continuing that society. The problem with the sales tax is that it doesn't do that. A sales tax shifts tax burden from wealthy individuals to low and middle income people. That's clear when you just look at the basic structure of the sales tax and how it affects people and the money that they spend. I think everyone acknowledges that, and that's why we put on all of the exemptions and rebates that we do on all the various sales taxes across the country to try to make it less regressive and more palatable to people. That's why we exempt medical care, we exempt food, we exempt utilities, and in some very few cases we provide low-income rebates. It's because because the fundamental nature of a sales tax is regressive. It hurts poor and middle-income people more than it does wealthy people. That's a fundamental problem. And I think that when we're doing basic tax policy, we ought to choose structures that are fundamentally progressive, like an income tax, where you don't have to put a lot of bells and whistles on it to make it palatable to people. We ought to choose a structure that we can work with into the future. Because what will happen over the long term is, if we put a sales tax in place, it's going to stay there forever. $265 million is just too much to replace from any other source of revenue. We will always have to have that sales tax there because it generates so much money. But what will happen every single session is the legislature will monkey with the bells and whistles. And right now, this sales tax is probably as progressive as it'll ever get. It'll only get worse from here. Right now, the biggest losers under this sales tax are middle-income people. That burden over time will get shifted to low-income people as the exemption for utilities and a low-income rebate get eliminated at the whim of the legislature when the legislature gets in a money crunch over the next 10 years. That's my biggest concern, is we're dealing with a structure that's fundamentally regressive, and we ought not to put that kind of a structure in place, because that's going to be, the natural tendency is to go back towards that basic structure.
Vicki raised the issue of education, and I'd like to ask all of you, including you, Pam, we're not going to leave you out, even though you've got to work against 3 legislators here, okay?
So unfair.
Well, let's start with Vicki on this education issue. Do you think this would be easier for the voters? Do you think this thing would really have a, we're reading now that it's trailing, it's an uphill fight for the proponents. Do you think it'd be a lot easier if some of it, or a good part of it, were earmarked for both K through 12 and the university system?
I don't think the fight would be as much uphill if it were committed that way, but there is no commitment for spending the money in that direction, which I think was a flaw in the politics of the bill. But I also think that in this sales tax proposal, people are being told that they'll get property tax breaks. I believe that that will never happen, especially in communities like Missoula, where now with the passage of our school equalization bill and school funding bill, our school boards alone can decide to raise your property taxes, and they have to, because the state's not giving as much. So consequently, the promise of property tax relief is there, and that it may come, but on the other hand, your property taxes will go up in Missoula as a result of the other legislation that we passed. So it's either a wash, or you're going to pay more in property taxes, and schools have to have that money to continue to operate in these times when they're being cut and hammered so badly.
Mike Allian, do you think the legislature should have tied this to education?
Well, I think we did, in the sense that we included the retirement levies, the capital outlay, and one other component to try to build some equalization, transportation aside, to try to build some equalization and meet the Supreme Court test there. But I have to go back to the fundamental question, and I hate to even use something that Nadelson's even referring to, but I think the public wants to fund a government that's streamlined and fair and efficient, and I think, and I don't sit on the budget like Mike or others do in that 70 days of hell that they go through to try to deal with this, but you didn't get the sense, and the public, let's say, does not have the sense that government has been either reinvented or reformed, whether it's K through 12 or higher education, so that they want to fund it, whether it's through existing taxes or any new tax. And I think that's where Dorothy and I, the fundamental difference would have been is the input of what do you want the government to look like, so that if we do have tax reform on the ballot and it's the most efficient, and then if you turn it down, fine, we'll operate with what we have. But I think that, so that's the fundamental question. Tying education to it buys you a few votes, but I just think with the public fearful as to what the Clinton administration may be doing with taxes across the board, it's a dimension out there that perhaps was not planned as part of this whole discussion, but it's in the back of all the people's minds, and now the excise and the energy and you name it is going to go up. So, I think the regressivity parts of it that Mike refers to, and the fact that the legislature can go back and tinker with it, I think hurts the breadth of it, the progressivity of it, and even if you tie it to education, there's an awful lot of low-income staff people working in education, the administration part of it, and a lot of $12,000 to $14,000 to $15,000 households that can't afford the home buy to get the tax credit, and therefore they will be just getting that $90 credit for the low income, and maybe we'll chip away at that.
Mike Kadish, any way you see this something you'd support if education were involved at time?
No. I think tax policy is very much a part of social policy. And when we do social policy in the legislature, I mean, I'm involved on the budget side mostly. I try to make the decisions about how much, you know, if you have $1, is that going to go to health care or is it going to go to K through 12? Well, where you get that dollar plays in that same equation. And I don't think it's fair to take dollars from low-income people so that you can educate them. I just don't think that's appropriate. I think education, generally, Montanans are more willing to have increased taxes for education. But I don't think Montanans are willing to accept a sales tax under any conditions. I mean, I don't think it's in the cards, you know, whether you put it for education or whether you put it all for other kinds of tax relief. I just don't think Montanans want it.
And Pam, how about you? I guess it could be argued that families are presumably for education.
I think that's true, and I think it's clear that Montanans are willing to pay a decent amount of taxes to support education. They know that those are their kids, and we have one of the best educated workforces in the country. And that's something that we've always stood behind. And that's important to our economic development. I think Representative Kadish is exactly right, however, that while that might have been a politically smart move, and all three of the legislators actually, that it may have bought a few votes, may have bought a few contributions to the fight. I think that fundamentally Montanans are smart enough to know that you don't pay for a short-term kind of gain in something that even that you care very much about, like education, with a long-term unfair tax structure. And I think they would have rejected it anyway.
Okay, we want to remind all of you out there that this is a call-in program, and we do have a phone sitting right here that lit up twice. Apparently people were calling for others here at MCAT. But if you'd like to call in, the number is 542-6228 or 542-MCAT. Somebody is calling, someone will answer, and then tell us that they want to get on here, and we'll be happy to go to you. But I'd like to talk about one of the great arguments about the sales tax is that it's in 45 of the 50 states, and only 2.5% of the U.S. population lives in non-sales tax states. Does that mean anything to anybody? Does that matter at all to any of you? Anybody want to just jump in on that?
If you look at the natural resource tax base that we have, I mean, if you look at the percentage of sales tax makes up of the general fund of most state governments, it's about a third. If you look at the natural resource taxes that we have generated over the years, it used to be about 28, 29%. It's now about 24%, I think, of our general fund budget. So our sales tax has largely been natural resource taxes because we happen to be a resource-based, rich state. And, you know, we export virtually all of those taxes to people out of the state of Montana. Why would we reduce those taxes so that we can pay more and shift that burden? So I think the fact that other states are doing it, you know, doesn't play well there because of the geography and what we have for resources.
Okay. They're holding up a sign that says line 2, so we'll go to line 2. Caller, you're on. Go ahead.
Yes. If you need help, hang up and then dial.
Line 1 it is. Go ahead. You're on MCAT.
Thank you. I'm curious about two things. One, I'm confused about the corporate income tax, what would happen to it if the sales tax does pass, and if anybody wants to comment about income tax versus sales tax in general. And the second question is about the cost of collecting the sales tax, how significant that is, and if that should be maybe a factor in not voting for it. Thank you.
Good question, caller. Thank you. Mike, you want to tackle that one on
Sure.
corporations versus income?
First of all, on the corporate income tax, if the sales tax passes, the corporate income tax will stay the same. I think it's 6.75%. If the sales tax fails, the corporate income tax will increase to about 7%, 7.05%. Regarding the broader question of personal income taxes, if the sales tax passes, there will be about a 10% overall reduction in income taxes. Most of the benefit of that reduction will go to very low-income people who will drop off the rolls altogether, and very high-income people, people with incomes of above $50,000 or $60,000 a year. middle-income people will see about the same level of income taxes as they currently have. If the sales tax fails, the total income tax will increase by about 10%. Most of that increased burden will go on people who have incomes, higher incomes. It begins to increase at about an income of $25,000 a year. So it tries to minimize the impact on the lower to moderate income and place more of the burden on the upper income. Whether you like, the backup plan, House Bill 671, is about a 10% total increase in tax revenue. It is also a major simplification of our income tax structure. It eliminates a myriad of different credits and deductions that people who could afford accountants were able to utilize and able to benefit within our tax structure. There will just be a standard deduction, a personal exemption, and a flat rate. And so everybody is going to get treated very much the same under the new income tax. I hope that we can, I hope that we're able to defeat the sales tax and let the new income tax go into place. I would encourage people not to sign Mr. Nadelson's petition. If they do, we will be back in a special session, and I would suggest there will be lots of new short-term solutions that would come out of such a special session. It is a good income tax reform package, one of the best things that we've been able to do in the legislature over the last 10 years, I would say.
Vicki, go ahead, Mike.
The other part of that is the administrative costs associated with the sales tax, and I mean, there's numbers anywhere from 125 to 150 employees in order to handle the exemption audits that because there are so many exemptions. So it's a $9 million to a $14 million item, depending on the number of employees and where those would be housed. I have no idea.
The other part of that cost issue
How
is
the
that
cost of a collection.
under the income tax bill, hopefully we would reduce the number of people working there because your income tax will be much simpler for you. It would be simpler to audit.
I hope so.
And on the other hand, the cost of the administration of the sales tax, if it were to pass, is about 2/3 of what we would collect from the tourists in the state. We always banner about the fact that all these tourists are going to pay things, but tourists, they say, don't buy refrigerators and cars in Montana and don't live here day to day. But the cost for 148 new employees and the administration will be borne mostly by that tourist collection.
Okay, again, the number 542-6228, 542-MCAT. A couple of people called, not for us again. We lost somebody, I think. But anyway, thanks to that caller. And I'd like to, since, again, Vicki, you raised the tourist issue, what about that? Mike, Mike Kadish, I saw in the pamphlet that your organization published that you figure somewhere around 10%. I've heard as low as 7% of the sales tax would be paid by tourists. Want to tell us where your numbers came from?
The 7% comes from taking federal government actually taking state of Montana expenditure reports. Over in the forestry school, there's a bureau there that does research on recreation, and they've done a good job of tracking how many dollars tourists spend, and so you buy different type of category and what they're spending it on. You simply take those numbers, back out the exemptions, and multiply it by 4%. You get about 7% if you do it that way. You get 10% if you look at Florida and try to extrapolate our economy from their economy. So the range, I think, is between 7 and 10%, which means between $21 million and $26, $27 million of the new of revenue, let's just say of revenue, is going to come from tourists. Now, that's on an annual basis. The costs of administering this new tax are going to be $14 to $15 million. The other thing proponents aren't telling us about the tourists, they're trying to sell this tax as, well, the tourists are going to be paying all this new money. But the fact of the matter is there are considerable tax breaks that are going to large out-of-state corporations that won't be paying any tax anymore. Stone Container is a good example. They'll be getting a property tax break in excess of $2 million. And essentially the new money from the tourists is going to go to make up for that break. That money,
that $2 million break is not going to come back to Montanans. That's going back to corporate headquarters.
Well, I think we just lost our caller on line 1 who got cold feet, I guess, or couldn't wait for you to finish your answer.
I'm sure we answered the question just
It's only television, folks. Don't be afraid to call up. It's 542-6228 or 542-MCAT is the number. There it is on your screen, and we invite your participation. Do you buy those tourist dollars, those tourist numbers, Mike? Is that about the way you see it?
Yeah, I think
Right on.
it's real important that people do understand that, and we try to be as straightforward as possible, not to consider tourists as someone, because they're paying the gas and the cigarettes and the bed tax now, and this is something that we said it would be about 30 million, and that's because ours was a broader base tax and it would raise a lot more than the one that's proposed here. But the tourists are a minimal factor, I think, in this sales tax. Montanans are going to pay 92 to 94% of the tax.
How could the legislature pass or put this referendum on the ballot with a $2 million tax break for stone container? How did they do that? Who wants to jump on it?
Well, because for 100 years we've been making tax policy, in at least 20 years ago, some of the bigger corporations had quite a bit of an impact on the legislature.
Anaconda, historic.
And, I think in the reform era, as we started looking at the business equipment taxes and we looked at a reappraisal for real property, we didn't change the mix of, change the rates for business equipment as we went down with everything else. And we want to get this.
Yeah, let's try to get line 1 before we lose it again, if I can make this work. Hello, caller, you're on MCAT.
Hi, how are you doing?
Okay, go ahead. Your question, please.
Yes, I wondered about the growth of Montana, the population against the taxation. It seems a little out of balance to me.
You mean, how do you mean that? Too much growth, not enough taxation?
No.
The other way around.
Taxation for growth.
Too much taxation, not enough growth.
Yes, we've lost a terrible amount of industry.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't believe we got the money here to support all this.
Good question. Who wants to tackle it? Thank you, caller.
Okay.
Fine. Go ahead. Who wants to tackle it?
I'll take it.
Go ahead.
I think if you look at Montana through the 80s, you saw stagnation and some decline. You look at Montana in the 90s, particularly western Montana, you see a considerable amount of growth in the population. The other thing, when you talk about growth in taxation, you have to look at not just the dollars, but the rates. The dollars are going to increase because of inflation, in the same way that the expenditures increase because of inflation. And everybody may be paying the same rate, which is fine, but the government will be collecting more money because of inflation. And I don't have a problem with that. I think that you're going to have to put inflation into the expenditure side of government too. I mean, government's got to give the employee raises, got to buy paper, got to pay telephone, got to pay for electric bills, and everything else, just like everyone else does. The last point is that there is a population increase going on, particularly on this side of the state, for the last year or two, and I expect it to continue. And I think as a consequence, again, you will see total dollar amount of taxes continue to increase because there are more demands and because there are more people paying that tax burden. I think that's good. I think that more people coming and paying more taxes is not a bad deal. I would particularly like to get some of the people who come here for the summer and leave for the winter and make sure they pay some more.
I think we all would like to do that. You said earlier about tourism impact, and you referred to Florida. We're not quite Florida with the tourism impact, but we still have that impact. And yet the governor vetoed a 1% increase in the bed tax. How do you all look at that? I sort of know the answer because I know what party you're from, but on the other hand, let's talk to our, we don't want to leave Pam out of this discussion, and we are, sort of almost totally in the legislative area
That's
here, Pam.
fair.
But the, you must have friends and relatives that come from out of the state, and we all like to share Montana, as the governor says in his commercial for tourism in Montana. But they get hit pretty hard, or not really hard enough, I guess some people think.
Well, and so do Montanans. I mean, I do a lot of traveling for my work. I do a lot of traveling because I love the state, and that's where I go when I vacation, and also because that's all I can afford to do is to stay in Montana, which is a good thing in the long run. But clearly, that tax is not just borne by visitors that we invite to come here. It certainly seems to me a contradiction that if the point of this, and certainly the point of the track television ads, is that 63% of the new revenue, or whatever figure it is that they're using, will be paid by tourists, and yet the same governor that supports this bill vetoed a 1% increase on the bed tax. It seems to be a contradiction to me.
Okay, thank you, and we're going to try this caller. Hello, caller, you're on MCAT. Hello, caller? I believe the caller just hung up. Call back, caller, 542-6228. The tourist thing in Montana is we promote it, we spend a lot of money on it. Is there a better way? I know in West Yellowstone and Big Sky now they collect the sales tax because of the special provision in the law. Is there a better way to extract money from tourists than we've been able to figure out? You guys kick that around at all in the legislature? Anybody want to take that?
We kick it around a lot, and we've talked ever since the Schwindet administration of a summer sales tax, a curio tax, and trying to, but like, the administrative costs of doing something for a summer are just massive.
Yeah.
It's just
It
absurd
ends
to
up
do.
being a wash, probably in terms of administration.
That's right. So, I mean, it's really difficult unless you're going to do a year-round sales type tax or something. The tourists or you just have a bed tax. We've talked about telephone. If you go to one of the bigger cities, if you go to use the phone, look at the charges that are just on the phone for just picking it up. And there's a 50 cents here, and there's a 25 cent. I mean, there is a way potentially to grab some revenue. And back to the accommodations tax. I mean, I carried the accommodations tax in 1985 that I couldn't get votes from Democrats because it was a sales tax. And then we all vote for it 2 years later. But I had 85% of the money going to local governments because that's where the impacts were. And now when the Love Fest came in '87, it all was going to the industry, and that's why they supported it. But I did not vote for the accommodations tax in the session because Dorothy and I supported comprehensive reform, and the accommodations tax was going to go to double under the proposal, and we would not select out an individual industry. We were all going to take a hit together if that were going to be the case. So, but I still don't think that the governor did the responsible thing by vetoing that tax.
Okay, before we go to another question, the phone is ringing and somebody's going to hold up a sign, maybe. Maybe it's somebody calling to sell us pizza, who knows, whatever. No cue, so we'll, oh yes, here's the cue. Hello, caller, you're on MCAT, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. You were just talking about the issue of taxing tourists, and I've always had a difficult problem with that argument. Tourists who patronize Montana businesses are indirectly paying taxes because the owners of those businesses pay income and property taxes. And so those who argue that tourists aren't being taxed are either stupid or they're being very deceptive. It's much the same as arguing that a renter doesn't pay taxes. Well, in fact, the renter does pay taxes. That's the landlord is the one that's getting credit for it, but in fact, the renter is paying the property taxes through his rent, and the same thing applies to the tourist who's paying indirectly the property and income taxes of businesses that he patronizes.
Well, I guess the question we're talking about is that tax stiff enough on the tourist? What do you think about that?
I think it's absurd. It's like asking the tax stiff enough on you and me when we patronize a business. Of course it is.
Okay, do you have a question for any of the panel, or do you want us to just pick that up and run with it?
I think that we need to discuss some more what would be the consequences of the Nadelson petition.
Well, that is.
I'm guessing that one's going to pass, and I'm concerned that the legislature is going to be able to deal with that problem.
Well, they'll have to deal with it somehow, but we'll get into that. Thank you very much, caller. Bye. How about the Nadelson thing? Nadelson, of course, is Rob Nadelson, law professor, who is trying to torpedo your income tax plan that you just so eloquently, Mike Gates, told us about. What would happen? Vicki, you want to take that one? Where are you going to go with it?
I think that anyone who signs that petition probably is looking at pie in the sky, and I think that that's what Nadelson's most crafty at, is telling people this is the way it can be, this is how we can reform government, we can streamline, we can do all these wonderful things in government. But I think the people who've been in Helena, who've sat through hearings, the average ordinary citizens that have watched the process carefully, know that that's not realistic. What will happen to us in this state if Nadelson's petition goes on the ballot is we will be in special session. And Representative Kato said earlier, the short-term Band-Aids will come out of the box again. We will probably have a surtax if we can even pass that. That then has the potential of being petitioned onto the ballot. I think that this sets a very bad precedence for what can happen in the state of Montana. A no sales tax or a no tax attitude is a destructive one. It's an attitude that says, I don't like living here, I don't want the services that I get, and I don't appreciate my paycheck when I get it from the University of Montana. I think Nadelson's doing a disservice to everyone in the state, has never studied carefully the issues in reducing the budget, like Mike Katis can explain in detail what's gone on there, how hard the appropriations process has worked to streamline, how the process of reform is not an overnight step. It's a slow, progressive one, and I think that that's one thing we can be proud of in Montana. You talk about value added. We may seem to be behind, but we're most progressive in the areas of environment. We've taken the time to look at the issues and establish some criteria that we want in Montana for ourselves. I think this move on the part of Nadelson and those people to do away with our income tax proposal is a move to destroy what's good about Montana. And we will be in special session, and the hatchet that has to come down then will not be pretty, because it will come down definitely on higher ed and K-12, because those are where the biggest pots of money are.
Well, I know the University of Montana, where we both work, is the people who run the place are nervous about it. Professor Nadelson's presence there notwithstanding, and there is a concern, as there is in K through 12. One of the things in terms of education, while we're on the subject, I noticed that in the all of you got this out there. If you still don't understand this, you can read this voter information thing that is about as complete as you'll ever see, because this is the law that we'll all be voting on next Tuesday. And I noticed that the Superintendent of Public Instruction, Nancy Keenan, was part of the argument against it when, I think, again, it goes back to our education tie question.
Bill, if I could go back, maybe try to give people some reasons for not signing Mr. Nadelson's petition. I think the reason for signing it is because you think that Montana's taxes are high. And I think Mr. Nadelson has tried to document that as best as he could. It's interesting to look at where he's getting most of his information, though. In the last 10 years, over the Reagan Revolution, across this country, right-wing think tanks have sprung up, financed by big corporations. The main one is the Heartland Institute out of Chicago. And those are the places and those are the people who are doing the research for Mr. Nadelson. And it's bogus. I mean, it is craftily put together, but it's lies. Fact of the matter is, an organization, State Policy Analysis, that's been doing research on tax policy for states for a number of years. They do a biannual report on state taxes, ranking the different states. Recently did their report. Montana comes out right in the middle. We come out right in the middle on income taxes, and not just dollars, but income taxes by personal income. So Montana's personal income is low. That would generally raise us up in the rankings. But when you adjust for personal income, we're average. When you adjust for personal income with regard to property taxes, we're average. We're right at the U.S. average. How do we do it? How do we stay average on income and property taxes and still not have a sales tax? Senator Halligan mentioned one of the ways, and that's because we have resource taxes. And most other states don't have resource taxes. The other way that we stay average on our tax burden and don't have a sales tax is because we are among the lowest spenders in the nation. We are 44th in the country in spending per person by personal income. We are not spending lots of money here in Montana to run a fat government. We have kept it fairly lean, and I think that taxes in Montana show that. You may think that your taxes are high in Montana. Try living someplace else. You'll find out they're not.
That's right. All right, caller on line 1, go ahead. You're on MCAT.
Yeah, I tuned in somewhat late, so I hope you haven't answered these questions, but I have two. First of all, I read a study recently that indicated that in the 80s, with the onset of Reaganomics, that basically what the state did was give a ton of tax breaks in the forms of business incentives to large businesses in an effort to try and get them to move to the state or expand in the state. My understanding is that the net job growth out of that action was about 500 new jobs total. And that what happened simultaneously was that the bottom dropped out of the mining, timber and agriculture markets. And, you know, we've been used to functioning on this boom or bust economy. These things never came back. And that's sort of why we're in this mess in the first place. Are my numbers accurate, and do you agree with that so far?
Anybody want to take that while the caller's still on the line?
Yeah, in 1981, we gave $120 million worth of tax relief to, and not just to big business, but to individuals and inheritance taxes and inventory taxes and across the board, a lot of other things.
How does that compare with other states who are also trying to keep or attract industry?
We are, I mean, I have got all of the economic development flow charts that show what incentives every other state has in relation to, and Montana has in relation to them. We have everything, all the equity loan programs, all of the other types of science and technology programs, all the tax incentives, we've got them all. So, and we have never been able to do the comprehensive study to show if they work or not, but we do get, at least from the Department of Revenue now, our tax expenditure booklet that shows what dollar amounts are taken advantage of in terms of tax incentives, and most of the ones that we do have on the books aren't used at all. I mean, they are ineffective in terms of attracting business.
Just
Larry, go ahead.
If I can just add one other thing to that kind of broad picture of what's happened with our revenue streams over the past 10 years. We did give a lot of tax breaks. We've also had a real bust in part of our natural resource economy. When the price of oil went from $30 a barrel to $13 a barrel, the state of Montana lost $40 million in the space of about 3 months. $40 million out of the revenue base. So that compounds year after year. And we've never been able to recover that from that, partially because oil has never recovered. It's still hanging around $20 a barrel on a good day. And we did receive a lot of revenue from oil. And when we lost that, you know, no fault of our own, it hurt big time here.
Caller, did you have a second question?
Yeah, I sure did. Part two is basically, given that we did that and sort of the bottom dropped out of everything, it seems to me that the whole discussion is on the wrong point, rather than the discussion being around what kind of tax incentives can we give business. When we found out in the 80s that didn't really work, shouldn't the discussion be centered around what do we do to reform our economy? How do we learn to add value to the products we produce, like making furniture here instead of shipping the raw logs out? Or how do we attract a Microsoft or something like that to the state that's not nearly as harmful to the environment, but that generates a great deal of income?
I've often said the state needs a good Honda plant, but that probably gets me an argument with a lot of people. Go ahead, Pam. Pam is raising
I want to
her hand.
argue about the Honda plant. But in addition to that, I mean, I think that's absolutely true. And I think your caller's first question was really on point as well. But as Mike pointed out earlier, part of that whole attraction of businesses also has to do with what else is going on in the state and the social policy that's created by the state tax system. For example, are we putting money into resources? Do we have the appropriate kinds of transportation systems and highways and airports? Do we have an appropriately educated workforce? As I said, right now we've got the best educated workforce one of the best certainly across the country. But if we are forced by a Nadelson petition or by whatever reason to slice K through 12, to slice higher education, to send our best and brightest and everybody for that matter out of state, those are the things that will across the board decrease our ability to attract those kinds of businesses. It's not going to happen if we've got an unfair tax policy.
Government has a really difficult time trying to build businesses. What we are good at is building basic infrastructure, human infrastructure through education and physical infrastructure through roads and bridges and telecommunications networks. And we ought to stick with what we're good at. We ought not to try to develop a lot of businesses through state government. We ought to let the market try to do that. And the way we can do that is by providing a real basic, clear, fair, stable tax structure.
Okay, caller, thank you.
Thank you.
Along that same line, Mike Malone, president of MSU, one of Montana's leading historians, and a lot of other people draw the analogy of the two-legged stool in terms of taxes. We have two of the legs, property and income, and the third in a lot of other states is sales. You buy that analogy at all, any of you?
No, because the natural resource taxes have been that third leg of the stool.
Yeah.
And even though we've suffered through the boom and bust parts of that, but I think that we have not, when we broaden the base for income, and when you look at where we rank in terms of averages for income and property, we're doing a dang good job of keeping our spending under control, so that those are not burdensome taxes. So the third leg may come from something far more efficient, like a value added.
Yeah.
Just a matter of how progressive you want to make that structure.
I think the other point that we keep leaving out is that we have been in a crisis reaction kind of mode for so long. We react to the overpopulation in the prison, and we react to kids who have psychological needs, and they get that way because we don't put enough emphasis on preventing child abuse. To me, the appropriate tax structure can, in the long term, and I'm saying that with a lot of emphasis because we've done Band-Aid, 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 and this last session it's true reform, I believe, in the income tax bill. Well, what Nadelson's group will do with a petition like this, or anybody with the attitude that no taxes, they're not good taxes, it doesn't matter what form they come in, puts us in a worse situation when it comes to just reacting to crisis. We are letting 350 prisoners out on the streets of our towns. And when Nadelson succeeds, if he does, we not only will have that problem, we will have less education in the state, we will have a less educated workforce, less productivity, more child abuse, and then we will need more police officers and firemen to fight arson. And I mean, we're perpetuating a society that I don't think we care about, and I think that's what Mike Kadish is saying. In the tax philosophy, you embrace the kind of society that you want, and our society is a Montana ideal, and I think that we can create a lot of problems for ourselves by reacting to crisis.
Is the problem of, and there's an argument over how many signatures Nadelson actually needs to get his measure on the ballot. Is this a problem that goes back to the 1972 Constitutional Convention that made this kind of thing easy, that makes the people out there able to overturn almost anything you do, which is why, according to Senator Fred Van Valkenburg, the legislature has never historically just passed a sales tax on its own, or any other kind of, other taxes they have, but this one in particular, because it would be overturned. It's so easy to do that under our 72 Constitution. Is that a problem?
You know, Bill, I talked to several people at a meeting in Bozeman last week, MSU people and other legislators, and they had spoken with people who'd served in the CONCON to find out, was this the intention of the Constitutional Convention? And the people who served there don't remember this coming up as something they were concerned with. So I don't know. They based the decision on the number from the Secretary of State's office on an older case law, and Constitutional Convention members and delegates don't remember the discussion about this having such an impact.
The 72 CONCON essentially adopted the language that was in the 1880 Constitution. That's where this particular clause comes from. So it is, it comes from a long tradition in Montana. It has been used very, very rarely. It's been used rarely because it is a difficult standard. Mr. Nadelson may think it's going to be easy to go out and get those signatures.
but I think he's probably got a lot of work to do it, and I certainly hope that he fails. But it is not an easy standard.
Okay. Are we going to get a cue for that phone line? I'm afraid to pick it up until they tell me to, so I won't. Okay. We have a few minutes left. Let's just go around and wrap it and start with you, Pam, and we hope we didn't exclude you from too much of the conversation. Certainly
That's why
didn't
I never
intend
would
to.
run for office. Get to be quieter.
Don't you want to run over there and Helen next
No.
time?
I'm very impressed with the discussion, particularly the whole discussion, but certainly with the level of thought and care that these legislators have put into this. I think that's really important, and I hope that the folks that are watching who have the opportunity to vote for these folks understand that. And again, as somebody who sat through a lot of the hearings and a lot of the deliberation at the legislative session, they really were there working their hearts out for the people back home. I think that's important. I wish that we could expand these kinds of discussions so that we could pull more Montanans in to look at the complexities of the problem, and maybe we could develop a fair solution that way. This is not that solution.
Mike Halligan?
I guess on the whole upheaval around the parole movement, Nadelson's just an offshoot of that. But all of us, I think, are huge fans of public participation in government. And, I think we welcome that by phone, by word, by petition, by whatever. But let's keep the debate honest and on the issues, and let's make sure we're talking about, the right numbers here, and we're not trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. And I think because the debate on the sales tax is happening so quickly, I think Nadelson's able to take advantage of that short process and barely catch people's attention so that you do have some quick decisions being made, and it may sign a petition at the same time they're doing something else, and it's a terrible reaction. It's not a wise way to develop public policy.
Let me jump in on this last call and see if we can pick up something here. Caller. Forget that. Vicki, what's your view of this whole thing after serving? I didn't mean to suggest at the beginning of the show that you guys were just taking it easy over there, because I know you worked hard. And with my talking to Sheila Stearns at the university and her counterpart at MSU, Marilyn Wessel, who both friends of mine, you guys worked your tails off, and we know that. I think sometimes the electorate feels, whether it's the press or whatever, that maybe it isn't this sort of unification that I think a lot of us would like to see, the gridlock or the anti-gridlock thing that Clinton talks about and others. So how do you view what we're up against now?
Well, I think that we in the legislature have moved beyond gridlock with the proposals that we've come out with and voting this way. But I urge that the people out there become critical thinkers and pay attention to the numbers they hear. And please vote and let all of us know. It's important to the future of Montana, and I think Montanans really and truly do care about this state.
Mike, I know you do too.
I think that it's been 22 years since we dealt with this decision. 1971, people of Montana rejected the sales tax 70% to 30%. We need to do that again. We need to settle this issue for the next 20 years. I think that it is a small price to pay to have to vote on this thing every 20 years to keep it from happening, but I think it's worth it. So I would encourage you to go out and vote. If we only defeat it 55-45, it'll stay a live issue, and it'll continue to haunt us, and it'll continue to be a roadblock in getting anything else done. We need to kill it again, 70-30. So please vote, and please vote no.
Okay, we need to wrap up. Our guests tonight have been Mike Kadas, Representative, Democrat from Missoula; Vicki Cottrella, Representative, Democrat from Missoula; Senator Mike Halligan, Democrat from Missoula; and Pam Egan of the Montana Family Union. We're glad that you all took the time to come tonight and to discuss this issue that is on the ballot. Remember, that's next Tuesday, June 8th. We all have our chance to vote yea or nay on this issue. My name is Bill Knowles. I'm from the School of Journalism at the University of Montana. We thank you for watching, and good night.